Hello, everybody. It's that time of the year again. The Financial Times best business books of the year. It's down to a short list of 6. Very exciting. We always cover it on this show. Last year, we covered it. The award was won by Parmy Olson, who wrote a wonderful book, Supremacy on AI. This year, there aren't any books on the short list about AI. Maybe we're in a post-AI age. The guy at the Financial Times who runs this whole affair is an old friend of mine, Andrew Hill. He's a senior business writer at the FT, and he's joining us now. Andrew, are we in the post-AI age? No AI books on this short list? Or maybe I'm wrong. I guess there's an NVIDIA book.
Yeah, I would take issue. I would have said you've got a book that is squarely at the center of AI, right up there, The Thinking Machine by Stephen Witt, about NVIDIA, as you say, and the rise of NVIDIA and the way in which it put its chips at the heart of the AI revolution. And you could argue that House of Huawei is, to some degree, linked to the question of kind of technology and China's role in technology, which is an element in a couple of the other books in the list. So yeah, no, we're not ignoring AI, and it was a big AI book on the long list, Empire of AI, about OpenAI. So it's been a strong technology year again.
Yeah, and I have to admit, I saw the long list, and Karen Howe, who wrote that book, you will disagree with me, Andrew, but I'm guessing had Parmy not won the award last year, the Howe book might have ended up on the shortlist. You will say, of course, no, but I'm not convinced.
I can't deny that, evidently, and this happened, frankly, during the book awards that we ran during and after the financial crisis. There were some early books about the financial crisis that made it to the list, and probably some later ones that tackled some of the consequences that may have lost out a bit just by the fact that there had already been some big books on the crisis that had got through. So it might be a bit of the case with AI, so finding new angles and so on. But I think Karen's book was, really worthy long list.
Yeah, I mean, she was on the show, and she was actually equally delightful with Parmy. Maybe they should combine on a book. Another book that I was actually surprised didn't get on it, because it's a very amusing book, wonderful title, Cory Doctorow's Enshittification. It's not on the list, so we probably shouldn't be talking about it, but it's an intriguing book. I've known Doctorow for years.
Yeah, I think he's nailed, and he's written about this in other places, including in the FT magazine before the book came out. But I mean, he's nailed something that we all recognize about the kind of gradual deterioration, now probably accelerated by the use of AI, of the tools, the online tools we use. And, his coinage is cropping up everywhere. So, I think, again, it's been, I think, a pretty strong year. You probably feel like I say that every year, but I think...
Well, you have to. You're paid to do that. You can't say it was a weak year, Andrew.
But it is a particularly big year. These are big books on the short list.
Yeah, I mean, we live in interesting times, to borrow a Chinese proverb. So that generates interesting books. And correct me, you probably will disagree again, but to me, the key theme this year, okay, I accept your fact that maybe there is some AI on the short list, but the key theme is China and this clash between two kinds of economic systems, the US and the American. I mean, even the NVIDIA book, which is supposedly about a US company, is in some ways about China and Taiwan.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree at all on that. I think that's very clearly a theme that's come through. I think our judges were, obviously the book award aims to choose the most compelling and enjoyable book. It also aims to choose a book which is a far harder task, which is going to stand the test of time. But inevitably, it is drawn into whatever is, going to be topical at that moment. And, there's such an appetite for understanding where China is going, understanding the US-China relationship. And as we'll discuss, a couple of these books are explicitly about that challenge, and just being able to find a perspective on it. My only regret is that we have not, to date, and perhaps this is a sign of some of what's the repression of some ideas out of China. We've not found a Chinese author translated into English who's giving us that kind of inside take on the rise of China. Maybe that'll come. Maybe it'll just not be one of those things that system produces.
Yeah, and the closest thing I guess you've got is Eva Du, if I pronounced her name right. She was on the show. She's written a fascinating book, The House of Huawei, Secret History of China's Most Powerful Company. Eva works at the Washington Post. She's originally, I think, she's of Chinese descent. This is a really interesting book, and my conversation with Eva was fascinating about how Huawei turned China, Sweden's neutral tech advantage, into a Cold War liability. In other words, how Huawei has replaced Ericsson as the kind of backbone of our networked age.
Yes, I mean, I think I'm fascinated by this partly because I've written about Huawei and even visited them before they sort of essentially put the shutters up. I find it a fascinating rise, partly for some of the things that she describes in the book, which is the way in which Huawei used its managed to sort of vault off the knowledge that was already out there and use its experience of building and working with and alongside international consultants and other companies to build its own dominance in this area. And I think she's done a great job actually of going as far as you could probably go as an outsider in describing the way in which Huawei has achieved that dominance. I mean, there are questions that the book's unable to answer. We're still not totally clear about whether these allegations of its strong links to the Chinese military stand up. There's a lot of mystery about Mr. Ren, the founder and CEO.
Yeah, fascinating guy though, and the compare and contrast I think is, and I talked about this with Eva, with Jensen Huang at NVIDIA, the ubiquitous media character, always wearing a leather jacket. Wits, the Thinking Machine, is a book about NVIDIA. How do you think NVIDIA and Huawei compare? In some ways they're very similar, in some ways they're very different, and of course their CEOs are both in a way similar and also very different. These companies came from nowhere and suddenly have become totally dominant.
Well, even whatever you think about the truth or otherwise of Huawei's kind of support from the state, it clearly did have that and has had that close relationship with the Chinese state. Whereas NVIDIA seems to me, in Stephen Witt's painting, much more of the sort of scrappy underdog working in areas starting with gaming chips and so on that were under. There was not the same focus on those areas in Silicon Valley and by other chip makers, and creating. I mean, he makes a strong case, Stephen Witt, in The Thinking Machine, for the way in which Jensen Huang almost he implies, not suicidally, obviously, because he's made it, but he picked out these niches that nobody else was serving, with very few people in them, academics and kind of high-end sort of nerdy gamers, and just kind of went for it.
Well, that's just that's what great entrepreneurs do. They find an opportunity which nobody else, which doesn't interest anyone else. Focus. It's a remarkable story. And I mean, what are they? The most, as we speak, Stephen, this may go out in the next few days. I mean, it's a $5 trillion company. It's almost absurd, really, that it's worth that much. In your view, are they conceivably, is NVIDIA the Cisco? And I asked Witt this, I'm sure he gets sick about getting asked this question, but is NVIDIA the Cisco of the AI revolution in 10 or 15 years? Will they just be another company?
Well, I'm a kind of great student of corporate history, and I'm always, and I studied and wrote about Kodak and other giants that are no more. And in fact, I went back to visit Kodak in its much depleted post-bankruptcy form.
In Rochester, New York.
Yeah. to interview their CEO. But I'm fascinated by the sort of threat of being unable to adapt. Clearly, there is a case for saying that the sheer demand for computing power that the AI giants need and would-be giants is going to go on fueling NVIDIA well into the future. And the book makes a strong case that Huang's approach, I think there's a passage which I recall from the book in which it describes how NVIDIA managed to make some big breakthrough. And literally the same afternoon, Huang was sending a memo around to staff saying, we really need to be on our mettle. We've got to go further. We've got to do better. We've got to work harder. So there's something there. I saw him actually yesterday on stage at the FT's AI Summit being interviewed. And he's talking, obviously, as he would do, about the fact that, this is nothing like that kind of early.
Yeah, I mean, it's a strategic thing he's faced with the challenge and I guess the opportunity of knowing how much of the stack he wants to bite off. He can't be Google. He can't be Microsoft. But if he limits himself to just the chips, or if he limits NVIDIA to the chips, then they could theoretically, at least, to borrow a well-worn cliche, be leaving money on the table.
Yeah, that's possible. I mean, I guess the danger too is that if they go for something that is too adjacent to what their core strength, then they end up kind of depleting their powers. I mean, I think the interesting comparison is Intel, where of course, 20 years ago, we're all talking about Andy Grove as a visionary, only the paranoid survive and so on, reinventing Intel at the point where it was going to be challenged by rivals. But now it lags and has to take money from the government. I mean, whether
but coming back to Andrew, coming back to Cory Doctorow's wonderful word, enshittification. Maybe another word to describe what's happening is enstatification. We see the appearance of the state. You mentioned Intel, the US, the MAGA state now is investing in Intel. And whilst NVIDIA is independent, it's certainly flirting with Trump. And of course, the Chinese model is a state capitalism. Dan Wong's book, Breakneck, another of the shortlist, China's Quest to Engineer the Future. Haven't been able to get Dan, he's too busy on the show, but it really struck me that the Chinese, without wishing to sound too paranoid, have really are engineering the future. There was a piece this week in your sister publication, your metaphorical sister, The Economist, about how China's clean energy revolution will reshape markets and politics. I mean, the degree to which China is focused on the future, in contrast to the US, is really astonishing, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think that book very, very starkly, with this great conceit that he has of China as a kind of engineering nation and the US as he puts it, a sort of lawyerly nation, a nation.
You mean that critically or just literally conceit, Andrew?
Well, no, I mean just as that's the framing that he has.
That's his shtick.
Yeah, and that is a strong way of thinking about it. It clearly puts the emphasis on China as being the one that is clearing the way for stuff to be built. It's pouring concrete, it's building things. Everything moves aside for the Chinese engineering state. But there is a caveat to that, which I think comes across pretty strongly. And Dan Wong did come on a podcast that we did briefly to discuss. He
goes on your show. He doesn't come on mine, Andrew. We'll have to give him a good spanking or a good warning.
But I mean, he made the point that obviously there's social engineering in China, and the risk there is that the social engineering, the repressive part of the state that says you can't say this thing, but you can certainly build this other thing, might in the end up just holding them back. And I think his prescription is, America needs a dose of the engineering state that China demonstrates.
Well, that's a no-brainer, Andrew, isn't it? I mean, I don't think anyone would disagree on that.
No, but what he's also saying is that that China needs to have some of that American ability, freedom of speech and information that the Chinese state has tended to be a bit leery of. So it's a way of kind of I think viewing the two that I found very, very compelling.
In terms of comparing and contrasting, all the books connect, but I think the book that really can be compared and contrasted with Wong's Breakneck, China's Quest to Engineer the Future, is the big publishing success of the year in the US, Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson's Abundance. I want to do a whole show actually on Abundance. I can't get Klein or Thompson, they're too busy, but I think we'll do a show on it before the awards. You read those two side by side, Andrew, it's astonishing. I mean, Abundance in many ways is about America's failure to build, isn't it?
Yes, and I mean, I think in a way, and clearly it is to some degree a polemic here that is kind of appealing to the left in America to say.
Well, a gentle polemic, the center left. I mean,
center left. Okay, so I mean, it is pushing and saying, you know what, you keep layering on this bureaucracy. You keep saying we're about to make this safer. We've got to find some way of, and that is ultimately holding back some of the things that made the American economy great. So that's as you say, it's a good companion volume to Breakneck, and it plays some of the same tunes when it's describing the regulatory apparatus that the left has tended to put in place in Klein and Thompson's view, and the way that can impede that engineering impetus that used to be more dominant.
Is it conceivable, Andrew, you control this committee, that you could have a joint winner? You could give it both to Breakneck and Abundance. It would be an interesting story about how these books should be read both in Washington, D.C. and in Beijing.
Well, I don't know whether any of our judges are listening. They have the final say, but I would strongly...
You have the final say, Andrew, aren't you in charge of that?
I'm not a judge in the final process, but that's in the hands of the judges and the chair, my boss, Rula Khalaf, the editor. But I would strongly counsel against a joint winner. I think that's it
might be a bit of a cop-out. I mean, the fact that Abundance is such a huge success, of course, it's been now blurred by everyone from Barack Obama to Fareed Zakaria, everybody on the center left. Does that help a book in terms of these awards, or do you think it makes the judges a bit wary? I didn't think it was a particularly good. I mean, it was an interesting book. It wasn't particularly substantial, in my view. I mean, it was written by two guys, and I'm always wary of joint authors because it means there's usually not a single author.
Yeah, I mean, I think the market success of a book neither helps nor hinders to some extent. You know, sometimes if a book has been out there's a sort of timing question. If a book has come out early we run our eligibility from mid-November to mid-November, so to about now. If a book came out at the end of last November and has already been out there, highly publicized, there might be a kind of fatigue element to having seen it puffed and out there for longer, and the advantage of surprise for a book that is less well known or less well read at that point. But I don't think it makes a substantial difference, to be honest.
What about the title? I mean, the title is I wouldn't say it's misleading, but this is not a book about abundance. It's a book about the reverse.
That's true, but it's a book about isn't it a book about how to recover abundance? You know, this is the kind of saying that's the objective. We've managed to stop ourselves from getting there, but we have the potential in the US to do that if we can just kind of shed some of these extra skins of regulation and bureaucracy that have held us back. So I'm not sure it's that misleading. I would say maybe there's a publishing element there. You know, publishers notoriously don't like negative titles. You know, Jim Collins used to say, probably still says, that How the Mighty Fail was his favorite book, but it was probably not the greatest seller because it was not saying good to great or any of the kind of more positive, sending more positive messages to potential readers. So calling it decline might not have been quite.
Yeah, I mean, the thing with the word abundance, though, is it's a bit misleading in the sense that that's a word that's very much in vogue in currency in Silicon Valley. And Klein and Thompson are not Silicon Valley cornucopian thinkers. They're and especially Klein. I mean, he's a policy guy and he's trying to figure out how to make government a little more effective. He doesn't imagine an abundant world of, infinite technology and leisure and all the other conceits of abundance that exist in Silicon Valley.
No, there was another book called Abundance that came out a few years ago that I remember was much more Silicon Valley based. And we
was that the Peter Diamandis book, I think.
That's it. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. We reviewed Abundance. Jennifer Harris, I think she's called, who was in the Biden.
Yeah, I want to get her on the show. I want to get Harris because I do want to have a show on it. But I think it's an important book. And there've been a number of books, and we've done them about this whole issue, particularly from a center-left position of why U.S. government doesn't work. Why can't they build stuff? And of course, the example that Klein and Thompson use is the best one, especially for me in California. If they spent billions of dollars on a high-speed rail link between San Francisco and Los Angeles, and all we got was about 30 yards of rail.
Yeah, I mean, Jennifer Harris, in our review, was a bit critical, only pointing out, that they could have mentioned some of the things that Biden was at least trying to do with his much criticized industrial policy, which, arguably is an example of government trying to put in place some of the issues, some of the props that will return abundance. But clearly, that's not an experiment that anyone really wants to talk about these days.
Titles matter. I have to admit that Carl Benedict Frey's book, How Progress Ends, is also, it's a good title, but it's slightly misleading. He's not as negative as that title might suggest. He was on the show. He's an old friend of the show, a very meticulous, very meticulate and erudite historian of economics and technology.
Yes, How Progress Ends is that big 1,000-year view book that we occasionally get, and I'm a fan of Frey's work personally. I like his kind of take on the history of technology, and again, there's overlap here with Abundance and with Breakneck.
Oh, absolutely. They're all part of the same narrative, all part of the same conversation.
He's talking about what happens with China, but he tells us about the Song dynasty and how it was kind of overwhelmed kind of invention with bureaucracy. So there's an interesting kind of read across there to some of the other books, I think. And it's our judges get excited, I think, about seeing these different perspectives which history can give. You don't want to overload the long list with histories, but Frey has the pedigree to be able to talk about this at the same time as being able to give us a little bit of a kind of throw forward as somebody who's written, in interesting ways or researched in interesting ways for example, what AI is going to do to employment and so on.
Yeah, Frey teaches at Oxford, and I made the terrible error in our conversation of accusing him of being German. He wasn't very amused. He's Swedish.
Right.
I have to be careful pigeonholing people. The final book, in some ways, brings everything together. I was particularly, this was perhaps of all the interviews I've done on your books, I think it was perhaps my favorite one. Edward Fishman is a delightful guest. And his book, Choke Points, American Power in the Age of Economic Warfare, really head-on addresses this, I guess it's a brave new world of economic warfare, zero-sum politics and economics in the US-Chinese new world. Is that fair, Andrew?
Yeah, it's highly topical. I think it's also very well informed because he was himself an insider in kind of framing.
Right, but also a smart guy. Not just a government insider.
No, it totally tells the story and what you think might be a sort of dry story of sanctions and the approach of the State Department, Treasury, and so on in these areas is actually quite a human story of people fighting to kind of, working to get the best possible tools, weapons, if you like, to use his warfare metaphor, to fight these this economic battle. And that seems to me to be highly topical. I mean, you could argue to some degree because we're in a different world post Doge with Trump. That there's standing the test of time will depend a little bit on what the outcomes are of tariffs and other sanctions approaches.
Yeah, and that's being determined in the Supreme Court as we speak. So
yeah, so one might want to look forward to a paperback with a new chapter that takes into account those kind of considerations. But I was talking to somebody last night actually who was saying that they'd noticed that he has influenced already the discourse, Fishman. Choke points is a word that apparently is now popping up.
Yeah, well, that's an ugly word. I'd rather have end statification, but what do I mean? Maybe I'll write a book called End Statification. I actually don't like the title. I think it's a bit cumbersome, but what do I know?
You think it's a bit misleading? I don't know whether that's kind of.
It's just not very sexy. It sounds well, maybe it's a bit too sexy. Choke points. I don't even know what it means, but it is fascinating. And I mean, all these books in their own way are talking about a new economic order, this Chinese-American competition, aren't they?
Yes, and I think
all of them. I mean, I think they all fit into the same narrative.
Look, what's interesting to me, and as I said, I help with a team of FT colleagues to kind of choose the long list of 16 books this year, 15 or 16 books, is that what we had in the long list was a pretty diverse range.
Yeah, I mean,
including, books about pollution. We had the kind of David Gillis,
the Genius Myth, Dirtbag Billionaire, all sorts of weird things.
We even had a novel in there, Drayton and Mackenzie, and the judges very clearly narrowed in on this kind of highly consequential US-China, US influence on the economic world theme. Without any qualms at all, actually. It was a very, very kind of driven process. And, some books that, with my background thinking more about leadership and management, that I'd have enjoyed seeing on the shortlist. No More Tears, excellent book about the kind of Johnson & Johnson and, where things went wrong with their trust-based approach to capitalism. Empire of AI that we've already mentioned.
Tim Minshall's book on manufacturing things. Yeah. Tim was on the show too.
So these books were kind of set aside, and very clearly, I think that's because people are distinguished judges who range from business through media and beyond. Are they're excited and worried by what's happening. So having that kind of strong shortlist, maybe they should give the prize to all 6 and say, you can't do that. I mean, is it conceivable that, and I'm asking you less on the book front than more as the business writer on the FT, is it conceivable that this game is already done, that China has won? I mean, with its clean energy revolution, with its control of energy, and the thirst for energy for all these new technologies, particularly AI, how easy will it be to dislodge China, particularly its control of rare earth, rare minerals? It seems as if it's China's game to lose now. Well, I mean, I think you're right to some degree. Some of those areas, and going back to the sort of choke points idea, some of those are already held by China. Rare earths, you mentioned. I chaired our metals and mining summit the other day, and a lot of the discussion it came on the day that China had decided to hit the rare earths export market, and there was some lively discussion about just how far behind.
I'm sure it was very lively. We had Cobalt Red. I think that was one of your shortlisted books on
last year
the show a couple of years ago.
Yes, I mean, so there's and part of the problem is obviously, as Breakneck identifies, is that industrial policy was out of favor. And in some cases, in the case of rare earth processing, for example, you've got to have some support for pricing in the market in order for any investor to risk building these.
I mean, I guess they could have made the wrong bet, but they made the right bet. They bet on energy. They bet on the fact that that solar would change the world. We've done lots of shows on solar energy, some on nuclear energy as well. So in a way, Andrew, nothing changes. Energy is as central to economics in the 2020s as it was in the 1970s. I mean, oil and solar is replacing oil.
I mean, the only thing I'd throw in on China, and I'm no expert on this, but in the same webinar that we did where Dan Wong spoke to me, we had some China experts then on to discuss the kind of Chinese economy in the light of that debate. And there is this concern about overcapacity. You know, has the state in China gone too far in encouraging, build? They have this word involution, which is the translation of a Chinese word representing, kind of cutthroat competition that might kill the goose that laid the golden egg. So, I mean, I think there are some risks implicit in the Chinese economy.
Well, there's always going to be risk. That goes without saying. But the fact that, say, Saudi Arabia now is trying to shift its oil-based economy to AI, and the AI economy is going to be powered by Chinese clean energy is a remarkable irony, isn't it?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think there's a lot more books to be written on that.
I'm sure, and I'm sure they'll be coming out next year. I'm guessing that there'll be some energy books. Energy will come back into vogue, and of course, Bill Gates, a couple of weeks ago, suggested that environmentalists need to rethink the idea of the apocalypse and imagine that technology can actually, if not save the world, certainly save the environment. I guess the story of the Chinese clean energy revolution is one where it's China as the white knight, so to speak, riding to save the world, whereas the Americans are continuing to invest in coal and oil and the other reactionary technologies. Yeah,
there's a strange. It's odd to me, again, as a slight outsider here, on that China and the European Union have made more of a pact with one another, because it does seem to me that there are frenemy opportunities here to work with China from the European point of view. But colleagues of mine who've recently been in China say it just makes them feel as though Europe has passed the point of no return. It's going to be a museum piece as China and possibly the US forge ahead.
Well, if I ask you who's going to win, you're not going to answer. You'll say, I don't know, the judges will decide. Here's my take for what it's worth. I think that Eddie Fishman has that Chris Miller-like quality. He won the Chips for his Chips book, and I think they're friends a couple of years ago or 3 years ago. Yeah. He'd be an attractive winner, in my view. It'd be nice to see a young man relatively young man like Fishman. I would be disappointed if Abundance won, because those guys have got enough money and fame. They don't need the FT Book of the Year. Although I'm guessing I wouldn't be surprised if the Wong book, Breakneck, it's an important book, although I haven't had him on the show. So those would be, if I had to rank favorites, it would be Fishman or Wong, for what it's worth. Am I being unrealistic? You don't have to tell me who you think.
No, I mean, I don't. As I say, I don't get a vote in this. I would say, from a personal point of view, and I've already tipped my hat towards the idea of kind of corporate and leadership books as being my thing. I've been fascinated by The Thinking Machine. I just feel as though NVIDIA's in the news. That's a book that I think.
And he's good, Whit. He wrote a book on music before, so he's not a sort of specialist writer. He's a broad writer.
He was longlisted for that book about how music got free a couple of years ago. So I would keep my eye on that. I think you're right that Breakneck is a book that kind of has that sort of zeitgeisty feel. And I like Choke Points. I think there's again, I say this every year, but this is a very strong shortlist, and it's going to be hard to separate them, in part because they do overlap to some degree. So if you make the case for a China book, you could argue that 4 or 5 of those books are strongly in that category, and might well benefit from that level of interest. It's one thing I would just throw in is we've only got a couple of weeks to go until we do the judging. It's not impossible that things happen in the world that affect what the judges think. if we did suddenly
How
get
many
a job,
judges are there?
I think this year we've got 10. You've got
Why don't you ever pick me?
Well, we I'll ask our headhunters to cast their
I'm not
net a bit
important
more
enough,
widely.
Andrew. I just have to have the authors on the show.
Well, that might be a way to get them, but then you'd have to recuse yourself from judging, which would be, tragic. But yeah, I would be interested to see if something happens in the next couple of weeks. If there were a.
Is it always the same committee, or do you pick different people every year for the judging?
There are a few people who've been on the judging panel for a while, like Shruti Vadera, the chair of Prudential, the UK Prudential here. Mohamed El-Erian has been on for a while, but we get new judges every year, and some cycle off. There's no formal.
Is there any sort of any big story there? Do some of the judges get poisoned or stab each other?
No, they tend to be pretty civilized. We've had a couple of occasions in recent years where it's been a very close run thing, and we've had to go down to some level of voting. But generally, the preference is for people to kind of coalesce around a winner and have a kind of consensus.
Yeah, I'm sure it's a very FT proper, polite kind of thing. And what about the commercial side? It's called the FT and Schroders Business Book of the Year. Who is Schroders?
So Schroders a global asset manager who've been partnering the prize for the last 3 years. So they've been a very fine partner.
What do they get out of it? Their name on the cover of the award?
Yeah, well, there's that, and we run sort of webinars that feature some of the Schroders team. They've run some podcasts and other material that backs the prize. So there's a kind of level of networking and reflected glory there, and access to the authors when they're available.
So they get their money's worth, Schroders.
I hope so. I really hope so.
And it's all going to get determined when? December the 3rd, a couple of weeks, Andrew.
December the 3rd in London is the day on which we'll be announcing the prize. If you're west of London in the US, for example, you'll be able to watch it, the actual prize giving or the announcement of the winner live online. I think we'll be using LinkedIn as one of the channels. And then there'll be interview. I usually interview the winner, whoever it is, the following day. So there'll be plenty of opportunity to catch up.
Well, if Wang wins, I'm definitely going to get him on the show because there'll be no excuse. We've had everybody else except the ubiquitous Klein and Thompson, who probably be impossible to get. I hope they don't win, but we shall see, Andrew. As always, honor, joy to have you on the show. Congratulations. Really an excellent list. As we both said, they fit together beautifully about this new world order, the US-Chinese economic, political, cultural, philosophical rivalry. And maybe we'll do a show at the end of the year when we know who the winner is. So good luck on the 3rd, Andrew.
Thanks.
And bear me in mind, my guess will be either Fishman or Wong. What do I know?